At a time when South Africa stands at a decisive crossroads, looking back on its history while trying to shape what comes next, President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke with two intentions: to honor the country's progress and to warn about forces he believes are pulling at its democratic path. From the wide grounds of Mereling Stadium in the Northwest Province, a venue tied to both historic meaning and hopeful symbolism, Ramaphosa delivered the African National Congress's annual January 8 statement, commemorating the party's 114th anniversary. His speech carried two moods at once: celebration of national achievements and caution about growing dangers to the constitutional system. At the center of his message was a pointed criticism of two powerful civic groups, AfriForum and Solidarity. While he avoided naming them directly through much of the address, his references to a vocal minority clearly echoed these organizations and their recent, widely reported activities overseas. In the president's view, their actions went beyond ordinary advocacy. He argued they amounted to an attack on South Africa's constitutional democracy. Leaning on the meaning of the Constitution itself, he described it as both the country's base and its boundary, a framework created in the aftermath of apartheid, respected for protecting equality, human dignity, and democratic rule. He warned that these principles are now under pressure from many directions, including social fragmentation, economic strain, and internal actors who twist reality for personal agendas, placing at risk the safeguards promised by the Constitution. Mereling Stadium was alive with noise and movement. Thousands of ANC supporters packed the space, waving party colors and celebrating loudly. But underneath the festive mood, tension was easy to sense. Ramaphosa spoke with pride about the ANC's role in ending apartheid, yet his tone also carried unease about what he called an escalating threat to South Africa's democratic institutions. He said the danger was not coming only from fringe voices, but from domestic organizations that had carried their complaints beyond the country's borders. His concern was that such campaigns, especially those focused on international lobbying, could distort South Africa's reality for the outside world and weaken the foundations of its democracy. In the weeks before the January 8 address, AfriForum and Solidarity traveled to the United States to meet political figures and promote claims that race-based laws and crime policies in South Africa discriminate against white citizens. For Ramaphosa and senior ANC leaders, these trips were not harmless outreach. They were seen as exporting internal disputes, inviting international judgment, interference, and the spread of misleading narratives, especially claims of white genocide. The president stressed that such stories do more than mislead foreign audiences, they also threaten South Africa's carefully built constitutional order and its long-standing commitment to non-racialism, equality, and social transformation. Ramaphosa went further, describing the wider impact of these international efforts. He warned that the methods used by these groups, boosting dramatic allegations and appealing to sympathetic global audiences, could erode the core values of constitutional democracy. He portrayed their approach as layered, not only circulating distorted information, but also drawing in external actors to legitimize narratives he believes clash with South Africa's lived reality. His worries were sharpened by the broader global climate, where arguments around identity, justice, and belonging have become increasingly explosive, crossing borders and shaping internal politics. For South Africa, a country born from the damage of institutional racial oppression and united under a constitution meant to protect dignity, these pressures strike at the center of shared citizenship. So, Ramaphosa's critique was not merely a condemnation. It was framed as a call to defend the social contract that holds citizens together despite deep differences. He emphasized that disagreement is part of democracy, but it must remain rooted in constitutional values and guided by a commitment to unity. In his view, civic action that shifts into global arenas without careful responsibility risks weakening the very institutions that made South Africa's democratic transition possible. His speech also exposed deeper concern within ANC and government circles about how civil society engages international audiences on sensitive issues like land reform, property rights, and policy interpretation. When internal conflict is projected onto the world stage, it can complicate sovereignty and encourage foreign governments to weigh in on domestic matters. This tension has been especially sharp given AfriForum and Solidarity's interactions with U.S. officials during the administration of former President Donald Trump. Those contacts triggered unease among lawmakers in Washington and added political strain across the Atlantic, as debates about South African policy became tangled with broader arguments on race, property, and governance. In this setting, Ramaphosa's January 8 speech became more than a routine party statement. It served as a call for shared responsibility, reminding people that democratic institutions survive not only through law but through civic behavior that honors common values. He urged South Africans to take ownership of their national story, arguing that freedom of expression must exist alongside loyalty to constitutional principles that protect unity, highlighting that rights and responsibilities depend on each other. He sought to reinforce the idea that democracy survives when citizens work together to defend its basic rules. Critics of the president's message, both inside the country and abroad, argued that his framing could squeeze dissent and reduce space for legitimate civic activism. From their perspective, groups like AfriForum and Solidarity were exercising constitutional rights by representing their communities and taking part in global discussions. They argued that international engagement does not necessarily weaken democracy and can, in fact, support informed debate on governance, policy, and minority protections. By taking their concerns abroad, these organizations, critics said, were entering a wider democratic conversation that may be heated but still falls within civic practice. Supporters of Ramaphosa, however, welcomed his remarks as a strong defense of constitutional integrity. They saw his warning as necessary protection against narratives that could deepen division or misrepresent the lived realities of South Africans. While recognizing that civic organizations have every right to advocate, his supporters argued that advocacy also carries a duty not to spread misinformation or present internal disputes in ways that damage social cohesion. In that sense, Ramaphosa's comments were a call to balance free speech with responsibility, ensuring public debate serves society as a whole rather than narrow political aims. Throughout the address, Ramaphosa repeatedly connected historical memory with modern duty. He reminded the crowd that South Africa's constitution was not born from abstract philosophy, but from a bitter struggle against apartheid, one that demanded sacrifice, bravery, and a relentless commitment to justice. In his telling, today's threats to democracy are part of that same long struggle and require vigilance, critical judgment, and collective loyalty to the principles written into the country's founding legal framework. His message was direct: defending constitutional values is a responsibility shared by everyone, not only elected leaders. The speech also highlighted the persistent tension between internal governance and international perception. As South Africa continues to face difficult realities, economic inequality, land reform, and social healing, the role of civil society becomes more significant. Yet when domestic disputes are carried onto global stages, those actions can disrupt internal governance, invite foreign scrutiny, and frame debates in ways that may miss the complexities on the ground. Ramaphosa's warning, then, was about national strategy as much as constitutional principle: protect the narrative while remaining committed to democratic norms. In closing, Ramaphosa's January 8 statement stood as both a celebration of the ANC's historic victories and a sober reminder of how fragile democracy can be. His words emphasized the Constitution as a living document, one that demands continual engagement, defense, and respect across society, while pointing to the pressures created by internal and international actors. He urged vigilance, open dialogue, and shared responsibility. His message was that democracy is not automatic. It requires participation, honesty, and devotion to the principles that led South Africa out of apartheid and into the promise of constitutional rule. Ultimately, the president's address was a plea for unity, accountability, and loyalty to the ideals that define the nation. It was a reminder that South Africa's democratic journey is not protected by history alone, but by the daily actions of its people. The Constitution, he argued, is not just text on paper. It is a covenant among citizens that demands constant watchfulness, principled debate, and a shared commitment to the common good. In an era of global uncertainty and domestic contestation, Ramaphosa's speech served as both guidance and a challenge, a call for South Africans to defend the values that make their country distinctive, resilient, and focused on the future.